So take it away, Mike.
Yeah, so I think a different room, we'd probably do the intros and go around the room, but we all know each other pretty
I'm
well.
David.
So,
Hi.
hi, David. Good to see you again. I'm glad you're here. And so I thought it'd just be helpful to kind of kick things off with an intro of Mark and I. I don't know that that's something we've done pretty consistently in the last calls. So if anyone's watching this, they're like, who are these guys? That might be helpful. But Mark has a long-standing background. I'll give a little intro for Mark, and then I'll introduce myself. But Mark's got a long-standing background in sales and business development for professional services firms, particularly in the agency world, but a variety of different areas. He's been consulting for a while now. And then I have a background in marketing, but I also have done sales in some way, shape, or form almost my entire career. And all the way back to like retail sales at Best Buy. But more recently, in the last 15 years, for my own marketing agency. And then I've been helping a lot of my clients with business development and sales processes, particularly when it comes to outreach programs, which is kind of that intersection between sales and marketing that I think Mark and I bring a lot of expertise and experience to that area. And so we're just excited to share with all of you some of the things that we've uncovered over the years. And then we do this together under a formal brand called Kindred. And we help professional services firms with training, consulting, and outreach programs around their business development and their sales processes. So, really trying to help them better utilize their CRMs, leverage LinkedIn and other platforms to do better outreach. And in particular, we're very focused on making the professional the hero, the central hero of business development, because that's ultimately who the client wants to build a relationship with at the end of the day. So we can talk more about that in this call or in future calls about kind of where that philosophy comes from. But we're just excited to have you, David, and anyone else that's listening in on the recording. So I appreciate all of you. And if you've got questions beyond this call, just hit us up. Let us know if there's something that you want to kind of tease apart and see if there's some way we can help you in your business development. So that's the new formal intro. Still kind of vague, but we're working on that. So yeah, I'd love to, David. I don't know if you've got any like burning questions or anything that you've been kind of working on that you want to tease out. We'd love to just give you an opportunity to throw that out there, and then we can go from there.
I guess I have one about kind of keeping the faith in the process, right? So, you know, if we have a strategy, for example, hey, I want to build a reputation as an expert in a certain subject area, hopefully slowly gain a following so people will trust me, and then hopefully that pays dividends down the line. Some version of that strategy, right? So, there might be a sort of a graph where like, the response, the engagement, the number of followers, et cetera, does this, and then there's this inflection point and yay, right? So the burning question is like, how do you know if you're here and you just need to stay with it,
Mhm.
or if you're just like banging your head against the wall and you're actually on the train going the wrong direction? You know, that discernment between I just need to stick with this longer versus I'm on the
Yep.
wrong train. This isn't bearing fruit.
Yep. That's a really good question. There's a lot of depth to that question. I think one thing that kind of jumped to mind immediately was your ideal client persona. So, one aspect of building expertise is making sure that you actually are diving deep. If you want to be perceived as a thought leader, if you want to have influence over others within a domain, the more specific you can be about exactly what you do and who you do it for, the quicker you're going to know whether that's resonating or not. And then it also gives you an opportunity to say, all right, I can actually build a list and start working through that list of people who fit this ICP, this ideal client persona, and start to talk to them. So while you're doing maybe more general, like, hey, I'm producing content, I'm putting out lots of good articles, maybe I'm working on some deeper thought leadership around a book, I'm doing podcasting, I'm doing all these other things that are producing thought leadership, and I'm disseminating that out to my following at whatever level that is. Maybe I'm starting to push that out directly one to one with certain people. At the same time, I'd also be identifying who in that list of like people that you're doing that you want to get in front of and you want to build that expertise with, who can I reach out to and start to get feedback from them, right? And say, does this resonate? So, one of the things like I'll just use Kindred and what Mark and I are trying to get going here with Kindred as an example. But, we've been, and particularly myself, I've been reaching out to accounting firm marketing directors and CMOs that I know, even all the way down into business development practitioners within those firms to find out like where is the right fit for what we're doing and where is there maybe a gap in how they perceive our expertise, how they perceive our solutions, and how they perceive just generally business development in the world of professional services. And I think those conversations are really, really critical to saying, yeah, I have an idea of who my target is, and I think I have an idea about how to influence them and show that I have this expertise. But until I actually talk to them, I don't really know. And so I would say that's probably one answer. I'm sure there's others. Mark, I don't know what you've got, what you're thinking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's obviously, the go-to, right, from any type of fundamental perspective is that ICP and really understanding and identifying it and having the conversations. And one thing that I was going to add to that is that years ago, I was working on my signature talk. This was probably 2.5 years ago. And I was really clear on who Michael Marketer was as I was working on that particular aspect for going after ad agencies and focusing in on ad agencies. We're now expanding into professional services, as Mike was just addressing, with accounting firms. And so, in that way, what I did was I said, I have this talk that I'd really like to do. And imagine I'm giving this talk in front of an audience of only marketers of like ad agencies, right? And so, what I did was I sent out an email to the people that I knew and I said, look, I'd like to create a win-win for you. And in this win-win, my goal is that you get 10x in terms of like the value in terms of your time. So you're going to get an hour's worth of this talk, and I'd like for you to receive 10 hours of kind of like consulting in some way, shape, or form that really helps you take the steps that you need for your firm. So would you be open? Like that's kind of my win for you, and the win for me is you're going to give me candid feedback. And I kind of shared that to say, and I sent it to a few people. The one person that got back to me early on, he said when he went through it, he's like, this is like you're going all over the place. And it was like wonderful feedback, right? And he's like, you need one theme throughout the entire thing. So I reworked the entire presentation and then went back and I used that same kind of email and said, like, hey, the goal for them was still the same. The message completely changed, but it was very specific to what it is that I really was thinking about for that ICP. Well, from there, I got one particular person to come in and say like, wow, that was cool, like, and ask some questions. So I was able to refine that. And over a series of times, it was finally fully cooked when I felt like I had a meeting with who was an ideal Michael marketer. And as he listened to it, he's like, Mark, this is scratching all the itches that I have. Done, right? Like I haven't changed it since then. I mean, I'll add different stories or some things like that, but the overall structure is still there. And so I think, to the same point of, are you pursuing someone who can write you a check, right, for what it is that you're looking to do, and how is it that you're really able to really understand what it is that they need? And so I think that ongoing communication with them directly, because you could do all of this in a lab and it all makes sense and it all works perfectly here until you put it out, put it out there. Like Mike Tyson says, the phrase, right? Everyone has got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And hopefully that marketing isn't like that, but at the same sometimes it can be, right? So how can you plan on making sure that you're talking to the right people? So that's my
Mhm.
that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean that's a good reminder that, it doesn't matter what you're saying if it's not in front of the right audience. Um, I think I told you a story once about singing a national anthem in front of 10,000 people, but they weren't at the baseball game to decide what gig they were going to go to next week. And so it didn't actually create ticket sales for the show because it was the wrong audience. It was an appreciative audience in the right location, but not in the right mindset. So that whole like who's your audience and are they in the right mood to hear you is so important about marketing. And so it's good to be reminded about that. Kind of following up, Mike, you talked about kind of diving in deep, and I want to make sure I understood right. My thought was I interpret what you're saying is providing content that's more than superficial. That's actually got some meaning, some actual value. Is that kind of what you were? Okay.
Yep.
Um, this is a challenge for me on particularly social media, even LinkedIn, social media, where when I write content that has depth, it takes time to consume, right? So it's
Mhm.
either a blog that takes, oh gosh, a whole 4 minutes to read, or which is like a million years in internet time, right? Or a video that's a little longer, something that takes a little while to develop. And it seems like the sort of general feedback from the social media world is give me a meme. And things that have depth can rarely be communicated effectively. They can be reminded in a meme if you already,
Yep.
have the depth, but they can't be introduced in a meme. And so
Yep.
how do you kind of cross that, I guess, the credibility bridge of saying, hey, it's worth your while to try to actually read this blog or watch this video that's longer than 30 seconds?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you like my personal take on this, and this
Mhm.
is not the best practice take. The personal take is if you have something of value to say it in whatever format you need to say it in and to get that value across. And if you're chasing just pure numbers of followers, that approach will not work.
Mhm.
Uh, the vast majority of people in consuming content on social media are not doing it for true depth of understanding and learning. They're doing it for entertainment. So if you want to be an entertainer, that's different, I think, than really being a thought leader.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that maybe a lot of people have confused over the last like 15 years because these social platforms, digital platforms, even like YouTube, right, have really incentivized people to be entertainers, but under
Mhm.
the guise of thought leadership. And they're not really developing any thoughtful, meaningful, deep ideas. They're just spitting out entertaining clips that maybe have like the feeling of depth because maybe the language
Mhm.
uses big words or
Mhm.
they look like they're smart. Like I think of a great example of this is or sorry, a counter example. So I would not say that Simon Sinek follows this trajectory. He developed his thought leadership through his books
Mhm.
and then gave talks. And if you look, like he has no social media presence. He's not out publishing, little tweets and TikToks and stuff. Other people are. They're
Mhm.
using his stuff as entertainment. Um, but his influence is incredible, right? So I would kind of caution just anyone who's kind of caught in this idea of like, well, my content can only be bite-sized in order to be approachable. I have lots of examples on LinkedIn of long form written content with no visuals that perform very well. But it's because the content is killer content. It scratches the itch of who they're talking to with real depth. One of those right now that I'm following is a guy in the accounting world. He works a lot with private equity firms. He has really, really data rich posts because he's done the hard work and collected a ton of data. Um, and his posts are, 5, 6, 8 paragraphs long. I know another guy who works in the startup world, Greg Head, and he's a phenomenal example of someone who is posting only long form posts, written posts with no visuals and no like emojis and like gimmicky stuff.
Mhm.
And because he's got a depth of experience in marketing and leadership for startups, and he's talked, and again, this goes back to the depth of knowledge that he has. He's literally had deep conversations with, I don't know, 1,000 CEOs of startups over the last 10 years, some of which are through a podcast, but some of which are through his own consulting. And he can bring to bear like that perspective in every post. And so, I think if that's what it takes, then that's what you stick to.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's like a whole layer of like, you still have to be able to write well, or you need to involve someone who can write well for you to develop those thoughts to be as concise and clear as possible. So length doesn't necessarily mean depth. It could mean that like it's just not thought out all the way.
Mhm.
Um, and that's another thing I would just, anyone who's trying to develop thought leadership, that takes time. You have to be able to just write and develop that and have the patience to say, hey, I'm not going to nail it on the first post. I'm not going to nail it on the first article. Might not even nail it on the first book.
Mhm.
But over a series of reworking that idea over and over, it is one reason why I'm a huge fan of podcasting and video content as the originating source, because we all talk faster than we write. Um, we can get a lot of kind of ideas out really quickly. They're not very developed, they're not very organized, they're not very concise. And then you can take that content, transcribe it, work through it, rewrite it again, and create something that's a lot more concise, clear, and thoughtful. But the talking, everyone's different in what like kind of medium works best for them. That certainly works for me. I really have no problem with that. But I just know a lot of thought, a lot of content or subject matter experts that really benefit from being able to talk through their ideas first. So I don't know if that totally answers the
Yeah,
question,
somewhat. I guess I want
but
to check in on like a cultural trend and see if you think it's true or not. I mean, I read 1 to 2 business books a month, whether
mhm,
mostly leadership, but also sales, marketing, etc. I know that makes me anomalous. Most people I know, including business owners, don't
yep,
read anything or read very, very few books. Um, I also read, blog length articles and whatnot. But I get the feeling that in our culture in general, that it's a shrinking minority who's actually interested in reading book length or even blog length pieces. And so even if it's a great book or a great blog, it's perfectly written. If the audience is like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't read, then
yeah.
there's no point in writing it, So I'm just curious if you feel like, is that true that the, the business audience, going across a number of ICPs, but from any sort of target people who are looking for content and leadership in business topics in general, like is that audience one that is increasingly a non-reading slash impatient audience, or is that just sort of something we think we see because of all the meme entertainment thing you referenced earlier?
I think there's some truth to that. I think if you're looking at younger demographics, there's certainly like a because the media types available to them. I think this is kind of a chicken and egg issue of like we're now basically looking at generations raised on video content, right?
Mhm.
Short form video content. Um, and because the platforms cater to that and they see how addictive that type of content is, keeps you on their platform way longer than written content. Then they cater that and they kind of push people towards it. So it's kind of this like we're training people to think that way. At the same time, when I look at thought leaders, I just see so many that still publish written content.
Mhm.
And I think it really comes down to like if you have something really worthwhile and valuable to say, people will consume
Mhm.
it, if it's written or not. Now, are there things you can do to maybe help them in that? So like if you write the book, please parse the book into blog posts and articles and social posts and maybe do an audio version of the book because there's a lot of people who would prefer that over sitting and reading through it, in a paper format or even an ebook format.
Mhm.
Break it up. I think of, Seth Godin is a fantastic example of this. A guy who was basically raised in the publishing industry, cut his teeth there, publishing books for other people, and really learned a ton about marketing through that process. All of his books, like, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but like every
No.
one of his books is literally an amalgamation of his blog posts. Um, and it worked for him. Not it doesn't work for everybody. Some people need to go write the book first. but I love the idea of like basically taking your source material, the things that you're going to write for something really deep and thoughtful, and basically open sourcing that, and that becomes your marketing. And so you're kind of like, I'm building the book while I by podcasting or by blogging or by tweeting, and eventually it's going to be a book. But in the process, I'm letting everybody in on my thought process. I'm giving them a taste of what they're going to get, and then when I package it, it's in a format that some of my audience, my really like diehard audience, really wants. Which
Mhm.
is, I don't want to have to go sift through all of your posts from the last 2 years to find all the good stuff. You've amalgamated the best stuff into a book for me, and now I can get it, I can purchase it, and I can take it with me, and I can write in it, and I can really digest it in whatever way I want to. Um, I'm just a really firm believer in like take your ideas and disseminate them in as many different media types as possible. So,
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, it's also a way of maybe effectively editing your work, right? So
mhm,
you write a chapter, you spend some time, feel like, hey, this chapter is solid, and then break it into one or more blogs, memes, videos, and so on. And then you see the feedback and what people say or don't say, and probably gives you some insights on how that chapter needs to be edited differently.
yep,
And then so on. And then obviously that's the while you're producing sort of benefit. And then longer term, you know, like you said, I like that idea that like a larger, well thought out chunk of work can be divided into sort of marketing assets that themselves, they're already kind of created, right? They're just, you're slicing, you're
yep.
pulling out a highlight from something you created that's rather than the other way around. And I found that to be true. Like if I write a blog that I think has got solid content, I can pull a paragraph from it and turn it into its own little meme-ish post easily. But if I
Yep.
have a couple of little memes, pulling them together into a blog doesn't really work generally because they're not, it's
Yeah.
like it's like one of those movies where they built a movie around the songs they wanted to feature, and you're like, yeah, that plot is not gonna work.
It rarely works unless it's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah. And just as we have about 5 minutes left here, and so one thing that I would just state too, and just to go back to essentially how this whole call started, is Mike mentioned about the ICP, right?
Mhm,
Who is your ICP? What are you writing to them about? Because all three of us are all readers,
mhm,
right? We all are regularly reading books. So to me, that what Mike was just talking about is very much like if you're going to write to me as you have something very important to say, I'm gonna read it. If it's in a, I mean, maybe like I definitely feel like more of my consumption is inside of books
mhm,
because of that sheer fact of like this isn't just a soundbite of something, right? It's something that has been conceptualized over time. And, that's really what I've been working on personally over the last year, year and a half for my book, right? And I'm now at this kind of element of where I'm kind of editing it through, and I have a few people reading through it right now. But it's been 13 years in development to get here. And what's been kind of fascinating about it all is there were things that I pull in. I'm like, I designed this in 2014. I designed this in 2017. I designed this in 2021. But here it is, right? For you to be able to consume in a sitting or multiple sittings, right, over a number of a couple days or weeks or whatever. So I think again, just going back to that iteration of who is your audience, what are you really talking to them about? What do you want to be known for,
mhm.
right? Mike was really able as we got going and talking about Kindred, so much of the things that we know about each other are found inside of what it is that we're doing, right? And so I think that's really where, again, understanding who it is that you're really looking to connect to and what that's really all about.
Yeah.
That's it. So,
And I think I'm
And that's a
realizing that I
yeah.
want to re-educate. It's something what I want to, because like I feel like my ICP has an idea that what we have is a commodity, and they're always frustrated that it's too expensive because they're only looking at what it costs. They see it as like a necessary expense, and they're not thinking at all about outcomes and the fact that it's actually an investment with return potential, and kind of talking to them about how to rethink. Because honestly, if you're just going to buy promo as a commodity, don't buy it. It's not, you're just wasting, you're throwing stuff in landfills, like, and trying to help people go, look, this is actually a thing that has value that can pay dividends back at you, and let's focus on what it can actually do for you. rather than like, how can I get this thing that I feel like I have to have, as cheaply as possible? And there's sort of a re-education thing. And sometimes I see that as a barrier to people wanting to read the content because they kind of think they already know. If I'm trying to convince you that orange juice is not a commodity, but it's really an investment, you're like, I don't need to hear that, But on the other hand, it's potentially a hook, I suppose, because if with the right sort of headline, you know, did you know that orange juice can pay you back? It's like, no, but maybe I'll read a few lines and figure out what you're talking about. That seems weird. There's I don't know, like, what do you think about the idea of like when what you're trying to teach people or share with people is trying to shake their concept of what they think they already know?
I think that is a great question. And I almost feel like that's something that we can discuss on the next one. Because again, I want to just be mindful of the time.
Oh
We
yeah,
only have 2 minutes
sorry,
left. No,
yeah,
that's okay. But again, these are the types of things that we want to be able to do in these calls is really bring up these opportunities and these discussions, right? Because this is like another layer of where we're at. So yeah, anyhow, it looked like Mike, you wanted to say something, and then I also wanted to make sure that we were able to kind of wrap up on time.
Yeah, I think just going back to, just being strategic about who you're trying to target, what you want to be known for. The alternative is kind of the artist approach, which is you just create as many different things as possible and just chase your passion and you hope that some of it sticks. And it's really at that point, it's a volume game of just, hey, I'm so creative, I'm so interested in so many different things, and I hope that other people come along on that journey, right?
mm,
And that's fine. I think there's a place for that. Um, but I don't think that way. And I think most people, if you're really trying to create a business, with your thought leadership, it's not just thought leadership for the sake of a passion, but it's like, hey, I have a passion and I want to marry that with like actually solving people's problems and providing value to them, and they pay me for that. Then I think you have to go into it being strategic, and a lot of that just
okay,
means you got to hone in and say, who am I trying to reach? What do I really want to be known for? And then asking a lot of questions in that process to get feedback, right? Because at the end of the day, you're looking at basically thought leadership is really no different than any other type of service or product strategy, which is that you need to find a product market fit, right? In this case, you're trying to find a fit between a perspective, a worldview, a philosophy that you have
mm,
around what you know, and saying, hey, I want to change your mind about how you think about these things.
yeah,
But somewhere in there, you got to find the fit, right? Where's the problem that you're really solving for them? And if you
yeah,
don't have that problem, then no, you're not going to get traction. That goes back to your original question of like, how long do I stick with it? And I would say, well, you stick with it until you start hearing that people don't need it.
Mhm.
They're not getting it. And that's where you have to get that feedback loop going.
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. We just kind of want to wrap up a little bit and then we could do
Yeah.
a takeaway. And then also I know Mike, you and I chatted a little bit about just yeah, as we're kind of wrapping up tonight. So or today. So
Yep.
David, any particular takeaway for you from today?
I mean, some of it's back to basics, right? Make sure you're keeping your audience in mind, know your ICP, and make sure that what you're saying is something they need to hear. Know the problems that they're trying to solve and the outcomes they're looking for, and make sure that if you're creating content, that it's actually meeting those, scratching that itch, as you said, Mark. Um, yeah. So that's good kind of reminder to go back to those guideposts.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. And then for anyone who's really listening in at a later time, this is something that, we'd love to have an opportunity to talk with you and go through. Again, we have some different training programs, we have outreach programs, and we've got really this CRM kind of overview of the things that we're doing here at Kindred. So, this is an example of a little bit of, where we're at. I mean, there's a lot more structure in terms of like the overall process that we have, which that was almost going to be another thing that I feel like could almost take an entire half hour, which would really be about modeling. And the model that we're really using is named very specifically as an umbrella for the various opportunities that we're solving for. That's called the Reconnect framework. And so, those are some of the things that we can continue to. As you have other questions, feel free to, message us, reach out to us, or set up a meeting. So I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add, Mike. I love your additions always.
No, I think you said it well, Mark. We would just love to help anybody who's looking at kind of reaching their audience at a different level, really developing those one-to-one connections that lead to long-term client relationships. I think that goes to something that Mark and I have been really thinking a lot about of just, relationship building for the purpose of business development means that the relationship is at the heart of it. And so how can you give value at every touch point while also aiming at saying, hey, I want to deliver that value in such a way that you see that there's a need to hire us, right? Or to bring us on and be a part of what you're doing in your business. So we've seen the success from that over the many years that we've been doing things both for our own businesses and for others that we've worked with. And I think there's a lot of things, particularly for professional services, where really elevating the expert as the relationship builder, which is difficult. A lot of times experts are not very relationally oriented. They just want to sit, put their head down and get the work done. But the reality is like that's who the client really needs to build a relationship with. So how can we do that sooner in the process? And how can we do that in a way that actually delivers value to those that you're trying to reach and build those relationships with? So yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
Thank you,
everybody.
gentlemen.
Thanks,
Till
David.
next month.
All right. Have a good one.